Hi and welcome to No War Zone. Here we are at the first anniversary of the end of the war. It has been a year of crucial change for everyone, especially those directly involved in and affected by the fighting. It is the events of this past year that have left us with challenges to overcome and goals to achieve during the next. To that end, in our first story this week, we take a look at the year gone by and some of the key events and issues it presented. Take a look. The Sri Lanka Army's historic victory over the LTTE on the 19th of May 2009 gave rise to countrywide celebrations. A 30-year war was over. Nationalist fervour was at its peak and the government enjoyed popularity like never before. The final stages of the war caused a mass exodus of civilians fleeing from the north to the relative safety of government-controlled areas. The civilians were housed in sprawling refugee camps, the largest of which was Manik Farm in the district of Vaunia. Government and humanitarian agencies struggled to cope with the vast numbers while adhering to international humanitarian standards in terms of hygiene and treatment. The search for a political solution suitable for all communities alike was high on the agenda during the immediate aftermath of the end of the war. The All-Party Representatives Committee, or APRC, already in existence for 2 years, was resuscitated by the President in July 2009 to initiate and monitor the nation's rebuilding process. One of the worst affected groups during the final stages of the war were children. As the LTTE lost more personnel, they forcibly recruited children as fighters to fill their ranks. Many were killed. Some were captured by the government and yet others surrendered. UNICEF collaborated with army and government authorities to set up rehabilitation camps in which most children spent 1 year, undergoing counseling and other measures that would help them to recover from the trauma of their experiences. As concerns about the humanitarian conditions in the IDP camps in the north escalated, especially in international media, the government announced its plans to resettle 80% of the displaced in 180 days. A prerequisite for a safe return, however, was demining, which in itself presented a massive problem. Although many felt it was too soon since the end of the war to hold elections in the north, the government decided that it would lend a sense of democracy and stability to a province that had undergone so much turmoil in the past. However, out of some 100,000 registered voters, only a little over 20,000 voted. The early onset of monsoon rains had devastating effects on the people in the Manik Farm camp. While some zones fared relatively well, others were completely flooded due to insufficient drainage systems. Overflowing kitchens and toilets made whole areas hazardous to the health of the inhabitants. Pressurized by local and international communities alike, the government began its resettlement program for the displaced people of the north in early September. The process, although sluggish at first, went on to pick up speed with resettlement drives in Trincomalee and Mannar. The Southern Provincial Council elections delivered predictable results. The ruling UPFA party, still immensely popular due to the successful defeat of the LTTE earlier in the year, won easily, with almost 70% of the votes against the UNP's 25. About 90,000 people displaced by the war began to return to their homes as a part of the government's return plan. Thousands of others were released from the camps where they had been living since the fighting came to an end. Internally displaced people were able to voluntarily leave the camps if they wished to move in with family and friends. 6 months after the end of the war, the government was still enjoying enormous popularity, and this was possibly a contributing factor to the president's announcement of his decision to hold presidential elections 2 years earlier than expected. However, his confidence of an easy victory was shaken when his ex-ally and former army commander, the retired General Sarath Fonseca, put himself in the running for the position of Sri Lanka's president, with the backing of a collective of the main parties in the opposition. When the much-anticipated election day arrived, the country went to vote. In the south, the voter turnout was between 70 and 80%, but in the east it was about 50% and tellingly less, 20% in the north. Despite expectations that it would be a close fight, the results the next day showed that President Rajapaksa had won by a landslide. Opposition members, including candidate retired General Sarath Fonseca, insisted that the votes had been rigged, but on the streets, government supporters celebrated the victory. The government's arrest of main opposition presidential candidate retired General Sarath Fonseca just days after the presidential election was met with mixed reactions. Though initial charges read committing military offences, these have since been expanded upon to include practicing politics while still in uniform, charges of conspiracy against the government, and also for fraudulent activities involving a relative's private company. The excitement over the presidential elections hardly had time to die down before the new campaigns for the upcoming general elections began. Historic numbers of candidates contested this election, and canvassing was fevered and highly competitive. Citizen involvement in this election, compared to the last, however, was low, as infighting between candidates overshadowed the needs of their electorates. The results of the general elections were unsurprising. The UPFA swept the polls but fell a few seats short of the two-thirds majority they were asking for. Voter turnout in the country as a whole was about 55%, very low in comparison with previous years, a figure possibly indicative of a sense of disillusionment amongst citizens about the value and impact of their vote. The government has marked the first anniversary of the victory against the LTTE by declaring the week from May 12th to the 18th as National Ranaviru Week. A victory parade on Goalface Green in Colombo was also announced for the 20th of May, but has been postponed due to bad weather. The armed forces are also remembering their fallen war heroes, as well as those who were disabled in the fighting during this week.